To be clear, our call to action is to work to dismantle white supremacy from our society, from our religion, from ourselves. We do not take on this charge lightly. There is no quick fix. White supremacy is firmly lodged in us and in our institutions, due not only to centuries of atrocities, injustices, and oppression, but also to centuries of ignoring, justifying, and rationalizing it. We at BJC have a unique role to play as a faith-based group, one with Baptist roots across racial and denominational lines, that is dedicated to advocating for faith freedom for all. Over the past several years, we have hosted conversations like this one that have helped us explore the intersections of faith freedom and human freedom, the way race and religious liberty interact. The protests for racial justice over the past several weeks have made clear the urgency of our task. We won't have faith freedom for all without racial justice. Just as American Christianity has been white too long, so has our American concept of religious freedom. Adding more diverse voices to our study of and advocacy for religious freedom will only strengthen our support for it. One powerful lesson that comes through in Robbie's work is how American Christianity was used to justify racism, to make a biblical case for the enslavement of Black bodies, to shore up terrorism, to perpetuate segregation and Jim Crow laws that created second-class citizenship. The impact of white supremacy on religion, as well as on other aspects of our society, persists in some ways that are rarely noticed or understood. The work to unravel that racism and white supremacy will take many years. It's a project that will require the involvement of a broad and diverse group of Christians. BJC has made the commitment to take on the difficult but necessary work of examining our own institutional history. I'm grateful for the charge the BJC Board of Directors made last fall to examine our history, and the work of BJC's Special Committee on Race and Religious Liberty that is ongoing and that will report to our board with recommendations on action this October. A more honest look at history, like the one in White Too Long, reveals the ways that Christian denominations allowed themselves to be used for political means by the Confederacy and by those who continued to celebrate its causes throughout the 20th century and to a lesser but still dangerous extent up until the present day. It's an arrangement that has benefited those in power, both religious and political leaders. Oppression has flourished. The vulnerable and marginalized have suffered. So has the integrity of the religion itself. But in addition to learning this history, to analyzing and interrogating the ways white supremacy has impacted our institutions, liturgies, and theologies, to taking actions for reparation for racism and the injustices it has perpetuated, we have yet more work to do to ensure religious liberty for all. We must guard against new efforts to co-opt American Christianity for political uses and new efforts that distort religious freedom. In other words, we must firmly reject Christian nationalism. What is Christian nationalism? Christian nationalism is a political ideology and cultural framework that seeks to merge American and Christian identities. It suggests that true Christians are Americans and that real Americans are Christian. It demands a privileged place for Christianity in our laws and government. It ignores foundational principles that protect faith freedom for all. Christian nationalism acts a lot like racism. It's pervasive, insidious, and infects all aspects of American life. It feeds on a carefully curated and white-centered version of history. Just like racism, we are all impacted by Christian nationalism, no matter our race, ethnicity, gender, or religion. The way it shows up for us, though, varies by our perspective, experience, and identity. And Christian nationalism, in the hands of white Christians, particularly those who feel threatened by changing culture and a perceived loss of power, can be very dangerous to those who are out of power, to the disenfranchised and vulnerable. Christian nationalism can be violent and even deadly. like the attack on Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston 5 years ago, or the attack on Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018. But oftentimes, those most extreme examples can distract us from the more mundane, everyday examples that are just as dangerous to our society because they are so embedded in it. Earlier this month, we saw a display of Christian nationalism on the national stage when President Trump staged a photo op using a Bible as a prop and St. John's Church as a backdrop, just blocks from where we are right now in D.C. The fact that peaceful protesters, including clergy and seminarians, were violently cleared from the space by the church to make room for the stunt is not only hypocritical, but also intensifies the harm of the misuse of the Bible and the church in this instance. There was a swift and emphatic rejection of the event by many religious leaders, including Bishop Mariam Budde of the Episcopal Diocese of Washington. But we cannot ignore that some religious leaders embraced and applauded the co-opting of religious symbols by the president. If those of us who call ourselves Christians do not distance ourselves from the misuse of our faith for political reasons, we risk not only tarnishing Christianity's reputation with the general public, but distorting the gospel of Jesus beyond recognition. This kind of power broker Christianity has been used to perpetuate racial subjugation for generations and has contributed greatly to the trauma and pain in our streets right now. Christians have a choice now about which side they will be on, the oppressed or the oppressors. And I believe we saw that choice made in various reactions to the president's photo op. We have also seen that choice made by thousands of Christians who have joined Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Last year, we at BJC, working in concert with a number of other religious groups, launched this nationwide grassroots movement of Christians who reject Christian nationalism as a distortion of our faith and as a threat to our country. We deliberately labeled this initiative as exclusive to Christians, not because we think non-Christians don't have a role to play in the public conversation and work to dismantle white supremacy. To the contrary, our statement explicitly affirms that people of all faiths and none have the right and responsibility to engage constructively in the public square. We also assert that one's religious affiliation or lack thereof should be irrelevant to one's standing in the civic community. These are core meanings of the expansive concept of religious freedom that BJC works tirelessly to promote. But this work of rejecting Christian nationalism must be led by those of us who profess to be Christ followers, just as the work of dismantling white supremacy must be largely borne by white Americans after listening to and learning from our brothers and sisters of color. Christians Against Christian Nationalism has been endorsed by a broad and diverse cross-section of American Christian life. BJC has led this movement because it falls squarely within our mission to advocate for faith freedom for all. As we reject the premise that the United States was founded as a Christian nation to privilege Christianity over other religions, we affirm the American ideals of religious freedom for all, with a government that remains neutral when it comes to religion. We believe that the best antidote to the poison of Christian nationalism is an abiding commitment to an expansive protection of faith freedom for all. I invite everyone watching to visit ChristiansAgainstChristianNationalism.org. Read our statement of principles. If you're a Christian, sign the statement and go on record with your opposition to Christian nationalism and the way it provides cover for white supremacy and racial subjugation. Share the statement with your networks. Start conversations about Christian nationalism. Use the 10-part podcast series on Christian nationalism available on the BJC podcast to learn more and to host dialogue. And stay in touch with us at BJC as we continue to explore these necessary and hard conversations in the weeks and months to come, and continue to work with others to build a strong movement of Christians against Christian nationalism. The conversation is just beginning.